Yo, what's up, everyone? So glad you guys tuned in. We have got some great stuff that we want to talk about today. We're going to talk about temptation. I think every single one of us has been through it. I'm pretty confident we all have. A lot of us have fallen into it, probably all of us. But we want to know, what is temptation? What is a test or trial? And what is sin? And why is it a sin? These are some really good questions to have answered, because when we can answer these things and identify them in our lives, we can be prepared for it, and we can overcome these things that come and attack us on a daily, so that we can become better people. How do we resist this? How do we get the point where we have these fleshly desires? How do we resist this type of temptation that may come towards us? So let's first look at what is temptation. So if we know what temptation is, and we get a better identity of that, Paul in the Bible talks about the renewal of the mind, and maybe how we shape and view things can change the way we react to them. Temptation promises satisfaction at the cost of obedience. Listen to that again. Temptation promises satisfaction at the cost of obedience. We fall into these temptations for these personal satisfaction, but at the same time we're being disobedient, whether it's to God, to our spouse, to our friends, to our family, to our parents, whatever that is. And that's where that temptation comes in. The purpose of temptation is to cause us to sin. So we have temptation. What is a test? And does God actually test us? Well, Psalm 7:9 says, "Oh, let the evil of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous. For the righteous God tries the hearts and the minds." Let me get something straight. God does not cause the temptation. When the temptation comes, because the enemy's job is to steal, kill, and destroy, at that point, there is a test that occurs, is whether or not you either engage or disengage, whether you partake or you avoid. It's at that point in time is the test that occurs because of temptation. God does not create this evil to come at you. That is not God. That is the enemy. He's there to tempt you. God's there to see where you're going to go, give you the opportunity out. And it's your choice to determine whether or not you're going to fall into temptation or you're going to trust God. See, a test in life is something that when showed proficient, it allows you to advance in life. We deal with all these temptations in life, and when God sees that you're able to overcome the temptations the devil throws at you, you can then begin to advance in life. For example, their proficiency, like when I was a police officer with my gun. I was constantly had to be put into situations through the police department, through training, that in the event that this occurs, this is how I react. Do I pull my gun? Do I pull my taser? Do I pull my pepper spray? Do I go hands-on? Where do you go, and how do you react in those situations? We had to become proficient in that, so that when the real world came at us, we didn't overreact or underreact in a situation. It had to be a constant thing in my life that I had to look at this training as an ability to make me more proficient with the tools that were given to me so that I could advance further in my career. When you look at temptation, think of temptation as an invitation to trust God. Temptation is an invitation to trust God. Remember, God does not create the temptation, but He is inviting you in the midst of temptation to trust Him. So whenever you feel tempted, that renewal of the mind thing, when that temptation comes, what you should be doing is taking that time to trust God. Look at it as, I'm being tempted, I'm being invited at the same time to trust God. Are you going to accept that invitation? Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther with the Catholic Church, said that we need prayer, meditation, and temptation. Temptation actually can draw us closer to God if we allow it. We need prayer, which is where we talk to God. We need meditation, where we meditate on the Word and we get into Bible studies and we listen to things like, this YouTube video to kind of dig deeper into the Word to get a better understanding, to worship, to meditate on the Lord and meditate on His Word. And then we need the temptation to draw us closer to God. See, if we look at that and we identify temptation as an ability to draw us closer to God and not push us further away, it gives us a completely different mindset of how we're going to deal with that temptation. So how do we minimize this temptation so that our mind is in the right place to be able to trust in God and to call on God for this? Well, the first thing would be is to move the line. If you know that you have this line in the sand, and a lot of us like to either get right up to that line and sin. We like to be like, okay, I'm not there, or we like to stand on that fence. Well, if you're standing on that fence, you're just as likely to fall over into sin as you are to fall out of sin. But if you take that line, if you know, for example, alcohol is a stronghold for you, going to a bar and getting a non-alcoholic drink leads you to fall closer into sin than falling out of sin. But if you decide that you avoid where you hang out with your friends because you don't want to fall into alcoholism because that's something you struggle with, then you move that line to say, listen, I'll hang out, but we're not going to go here or there. I'm going to hang out over here where it may be easier to resist for you. So you move that line so that if you accidentally fall over that line, you're still not in sin. The second thing is you would need to magnify the cost. Like, for example, if you have a problem with overspending, and if you look at it and say, okay, if I spend all this money, and you magnify the cost that if I lose my job and I have this debt and I have all these problems or my health gets bad and I don't have the money to fix these things, then what you're doing is you're magnifying the cost or the consequences of what could be worst case scenario of you overspending. Maybe I can't pay my electric bill because the electric bill was higher. Maybe the water bill was higher. So now when you magnify the cost, it makes it less desirable for you to commit that sin. And then the third thing is you always have to plan an escape. If this happens, this is what I will do. I can't be in the situation thinking, how am I going to get out of this? You need to already have that escape plan. Just like, when I was a kid, we grew up and we had to have this escape plan that we had that in the event there was a fire in my home, this is how I would escape. Not, there's a fire in the home, how do I get out? You should already know those things before you enter, before the sin ever occurs or before the temptation even happens. You'll hear a lot of people say that this is a sin, and you ask them why, and they say it's because the Bible said so. I'm not against because the Bible said so, don't get me wrong there. But I like to know why, because if you have a deeper understanding why something is a sin, then it's easier to resist. Let's take pornography, for example. A lot of people say, well, it's lustful. You're lusting after someone. And that could be true, and in some cases it may not be. You may not be lusting. I've talked to many people who have had pornography addictions, and it wasn't just about lust. It may be having a hard time falling asleep, or, it could be a number of things that people have used as a reason why. But if you look at pornography, there's quite a few things about that is very dark. That's not as black and white as just lust. If you're married, pornography, what it does is it deprives your spouse from being able to meet your need. It also deprives you from becoming a better man that is more desirable by your wife. So it reduces your ability to become a better person, even if you're single. If you don't have this ability to attract women so that you can find a spouse that you can settle down with, it reduces your ability to become a better man so that you can find that right one. And it reduces you to be a better husband or wife to become more desirable for your spouse. And you're depriving them that ability to satisfy your need. The other thing with pornography a lot of people don't think of is that, and it's the same thing with with sex outside of marriage, is that when you engage in these things and these visuals and these acts that happen, what happens is they ingrain these images into your mind. And when these things are ingrained into your mind, when you go back to your marital bed, what it does is it opens up the door for judgment in the bedroom, which is a bad thing to have. To be judging your spouse in the bedroom. Oh, I wish they would do this, or I wish they acted this way, or I wish they looked this way. That is not the place for a good marriage or a good relationship, is to have judgment in the bedroom. That should not be a place of judgment, but a place of intimacy and love. You know, a lot of times in life, we also like to justify our sins and our behavior. We like to place blame. Well, if so-and-so didn't do that, I wouldn't have done this. Or sometimes we'll even blame God. If God didn't do that, then I wouldn't have done this. And we'll come up with these crazy things like, well, if you don't want me to log into Pornhub, then when I punch in this URL and I hit enter, you won't have it load. We justify these sins by placing blame other places, when in reality is we need to look in the mirror and the decision was still made by us. Being told that you're sinning and confessing and believing that you're sinning are two different things. It's just like we've noticed that we've helped a lot of people quit smoking. And when they come into our business, we talk to them. And when they come in and they say, well, I'm quitting because my husband doesn't like it or my kids don't like it, we find the success rate of quitting smoking is not that great, because they're doing it because they don't see the need. But when they see the need and they've accepted that it's no good for them and they want to make the change because they've identified it in their life, we find the success rate go up drastically. And it's the same thing with sin in your life. If you identify, instead of placing blame somewhere else, if you identify that sin in your life and you confess it and you recognize it, it is easier to work through it when you know it and you recognize it, not because someone else told you, but because deep down in your soul and in your heart, you know that it's wrong. It's easier to work towards fixing it than completely denying it and just having the head knowledge it's bad. That's one reason it's really good to understand why what you're doing is a sin and not just that it is a sin. In Romans 12:2, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So I want you to think to yourself, what would life look like 5 to 10 years from now if you resisted the temptations that you have in front of you? Where would you be? Where would you be in a relationship? Where would you be financially? Where would you be if you resisted temptation 5, 10 years ago? Where would you be today? Have that as your focus of why you need to resist. So anyone who knows me knows that, currently I drink a lot of Coke Zero. I enjoy Coke Zero. I wouldn't say a lot, but some people say it's a lot. And so my wife came to me one day and said, I bet you can't go a day without drinking it. So I ended up going a day without drinking it, and then 2 days, then 3 days, and I drank nothing but water. And she said, well, did you even think about it? And I was like, well, no, I didn't think about drinking Coke Zero. And she said, no, you're lying. And this is that transforming of the mind. Because what I did in the morning when I woke up, I said, I'm going to drink water today. And anytime I got thirsty, I said, I'm going to drink water. And that's all I did was went and grabbed a bottle of water. Why? Because water was on my mind. See, too many of us, we try to quit sinning. So when we go somewhere or do something, we say to ourselves, don't do that, don't do that. Like you go to a grocery store and it's like, don't look at the cakes, don't look at the cakes, don't look at the cakes, don't look at the cakes. And what are you doing is you're putting the idea of cake in your mind. It's like for me to tell you right now, don't think about strawberries. Don't think about strawberries covered in whipped cream, on top of a cake. The first thing that comes to your mind is you start to imagine those things. If you wake up in the morning, you're addicted to alcohol, don't be waking up saying, don't think of alcohol, don't think of alcohol, don't think of alcohol. Because all you're doing is repeating the sin in your mind, and because it's being repeated in your mind, it's becoming harder and harder to resist. Think about what you can do to become a better person. Think about what you can do to be more obedient. Think about what you can do to not sin. And put your focus there and not on the resistance of sin. So quit trying to quit sinning and start working towards becoming a better person. That's your goal today. So when that temptation comes, it's easier to resist. You've changed that line. You know that temptation is there for you to rely on God. You're not going to focus on the sin because you're going to focus on becoming a better person. Stop trying to quit sinning and start trying to become a better person. Love you guys. Have a great day.